Hello and welcome back one and all to the RimWorld Alcohol Empire. Today's episode, people, is going to be action-packed. There's a lot of shit that goes down. I'm just going to say I hope you guys are ready because this episode is pretty crazy. I'd also like to state that this episode will be the last episode in the Alcohol Empire series. The story, of course, will continue. I have made this episode quite a bit longer than usual. That way we can get a lot more narrative and events packed in. This episode begins with a bit of trading with a local trade caravan, as of course they wanted some of our wonderful high-quality alcohol in exchange for a good bit of silver. Now, after all the trading was done, we of course had Blitz, who had been commissioned by Tree previously to build everyone some individual homes. He was still working on that. Just as well, I believe Shortus was also helping him with this project. And I realize I said that this is going to be the last episode, so I want to assure you the Alcohol Empire does not fall in this episode, so building these cabins as well as other things is not, a useless endeavor or anything like that, because we're still going to be here. Well, I should say maybe some of us are still going to be here. Joking, I kid, everyone survives. Or do they? Let's find out. During this time, one rainy evening, we sent Ninjak out to mine some compacted machinery so we could have components because we are still in the process of converting over to electric and gas-powered lighting. And of course, as mentioned last episode with this is to help us shift from using wood for fuel in our lighting and whatnot into more projects such as buildings and things like that. In the meantime, our newest member, Chet, who we rescued last episode, was a cigarette rolling machine. He was just turning all the tobacco leaves we had harvested into cigarettes for everyone to enjoy. We also ended up having a cougar who was very hungry, deciding to try and hunt Lucky for, food, because the cougar was apparently starving and there were no better animals to try and attack. Unfortunately for the cougar though, this bipedal critter was packing some heat, so we quickly smoked its ass. While we're on the topic of animals as well, we had Bacchus making some wonderful chainmail armor for our wolves and for our huskies, just as we kind of discussed last episode. We want to have them all protected because we would like to take them into battle. And even if not in the battle, we at least want them armored up so they'll be ready if one of us is getting attacked or something like that. Now, in this episode, we are still somewhat on the hunt for some prosthetic body parts, artificial body parts, things like that, so we sent out a small caravan to a local settlement to see if they had any to trade. I believe they ended up having one prosthetic leg. Now, this prosthetic leg is not actually an artificial leg. I just kind of forgot that when buying it, but I mean, it's not like it's bionics or anything like that, so I don't think it's a big deal. Just after the caravan returned home, we actually had some refugees and or vagabonds who were requesting silver to try and buy back one of their friends who were kidnapped, most likely by the RimWorld Marshal Service, so we did happily oblige them. And I do think that this perfectly captures the fact that the RimWorld Marshal Service is not just our enemy. They truly are oppressive. They kidnap people, they enslave people. They are just an awful, horrible faction of human beings who just want to dominate the world. But someone has to stand up to them. Someone has to be the light at the end of the tunnel. And the settlers and the Thromboians, though they are trying to do this on their own, as we've talked about before, really the only way to go about defeating such a massive faction is by joining forces, and we hope to do that today. And that is why today we are going to be gearing up our animals for fighting. We are going to be making more alcohol and breeding our animals and growing more food, and we're going to try to gift a lot of these things to the other factions to try and win them over, if you will, to try and get them to join us on our revolution. Because truly what this RimWorld needs is a revolution to bring it from the clutches and the icy grip of the RimWorld Marshal Service. By this point, we had most of our dogs and our wolf armored up fairly well. We were still working on trying to get a few of the stragglers armored up. I saw Chet just sitting outside our dining hall, having a good little stab at his fingers and, basically just having a good time. Although we are trying to have a revolution, we still need to make room for recreation. Just as well with recreation, we also have to think about infrastructure. So we were also building a road from town to the graveyard. We also planned on building a few other roads around town to make things much more easier. And then, right slap dab in the middle of all this infrastructure building, we had Chet and Lucky fall in love. They became lovers, and what an amazing day. To see the two fall in love was such a wonderful spectacle. Everyone, of course, in the town approved of this wonderful relationship, but we thought they were perfect together. And I also kind of forgot that she's 17 and he's 24, so got a few years between them. It's not too big of a deal, but a tiny bit concerning. Anyhow, we built them a double bed for their new cabin. Chet also began working on a bit of a gift for Tree. It was a mechanical arm. This would be the most high quality limb that we could create. This also means it's going to take an extremely long time to complete, so we'll check back in with Chet and the mechanical arm later. We ended up having another trade caravan stop in, and they had just what we needed, so we traded them some packs of cigarettes as well as some alcohol for a few sticks of dynamite. What did we need the dynamite for? Well, my dear boy and or girl, we're going to use it for some death and destruction. But before that, Oakley had a growth moment, which was just so sad to me. Oakley is now 10 years old. It's so crazy to see that just a few episodes ago, she was baby Oakley. For us, it's only been a few episodes, but for this family and this colony, it's been a few years. Now, sometime later, we decided to go on a bit of a trading mission, as well as offering some gifts to local settlements. Now for this trade/gift-giving mission, we are sending out Hack, we are sending out Chet, and we are sending out Lucky. The three of them are very intelligent and also very formidable in combat. Unfortunately for the rest of us though, while they were gone, we had a bunch of gazelle lose their minds out in the forest. They went bonkers and decided they were going to try and hunt us humanoids. Of course though, we had Gatling guns and cannons and swivel guns and all these other wonderful things, so it didn't take us very long at all to end up destroying all of the gazelles. A lot of them were also killed in our traps, so basically they weren't much of a threat, thankfully. So for this trade mission, something I would like to mention is that the Thromboians and the settlers hate each other, so we're not going to be able to unite if those two can't get along. So the items that we're actually trading, we are pretending are a trading mission basically from the settlers, and then the silver the Thromboians give us, we are going to be giving to the settlers as a gift from the Thromboians to try and ease tensions and try and repair relations. Now, is this us lying to both factions? Yes, it is, but it is for a greater good so we can unite everyone together. When we were at the Red Cove settlement, the president there was also discussing with us they don't actually have enough crops to feed all of their people this season because of a massive blight. So we did the most charitable thing that we could. We had plenty of extra crops, so we decided to load all of those up and we would take them back to the Red Cove settlement. That way they could feed their people. And in terms of in-game points and that sort of thing, this won't gain us a lot of favor. However, this would gain us a lot of favor in terms of, the settlers would like us more, and also they wouldn't starve to death. Our allies are not going to be very useful if they're all starving and or dead from starvation. During this time back home at Silverhorn Mountain, Blitz was working on a beautiful hospital for us all, and the suggestion to build a small hospital here at Silverhorn Mountain comes from our good friend Herr Schwaka. I apologize, I can't pronounce your name at all, so I'm so sorry about that, but thank you ever so much for the wonderful suggestion. And then of course, as if on cue, when things are going wonderful, what always happens? We end up having a raid or ambush or something from the RimWorld Marshal Service, and that's just what happened this time as well. Once again, Constable Morris has come to ruin our day. He and a bunch of his elite officers have ambushed our caravan. And unfortunately, upon further inspection, it would appear that he and the officers have killed several settlers who were in this area as well. Constable Morris and his officers are not to be taken lightly. He is extremely powerful and extremely crafty with his tactics. He and the officers began surrounding our bootleggers. But our bootleggers were not afraid. They would stand tall in the face of oppression and in the face of... Oh my God, Lucky! Oh my God! The constable sniped Lucky from a distance and shot her right between the eyes. She was dead. Hack and then Ninjak began running for the nearest cover they could find. Luckily, Ninjak and Hack were on horses, so they were much faster than the officers. They looped around the ancient ruins, headed back, loaded Lucky up on their horses, and began running away from the officers. And thankfully, they did manage to make it back home alive. Everyone except poor Lucky. And now, of course, Hack and Ninjak had the awful task of trying to break this news to everyone else in the colony. It was decided that we would hold a bit of a memorial service, if you will, out by the statue in the center of town. Everyone gathered in the center of town for Lucky's memorial, all of her family, all of her friends, just before they took her to her final resting place. We were all enraged by what had happened. Our hearts felt empty without Lucky. We all felt sorrow, but we still were very, very angry. The most angry among us, of course, her siblings and her parents. Tree was so enraged by the murder of her stepdaughter, she vowed the absolute destruction of the RimWorld Marshal Service. During the funeral, Bacchus said a few words about her step-granddaughter, reminisced about all the times that she would see her playing with her baby sister, Oakley, or all the times that she would be in the brewery drawing on the ground, and just all the good memories. Unfortunately now, that's just all we have. Memories. Things were much more bleak now. There are many discussions as to what we should do. Tree and Shortus and the others, of course, led by their emotions, were very angry, and they had many, many plans, but really only one seemed as though it would be the best idea. The idea would be that Tree herself would go and speak with the president of the Red Cove settlement and discuss further options about possibly attacking the RimWorld Marshal Service and destroying the local settlement that they have. As a show of good faith, she would also take many leathers and furs and other things to offer to them as gifts, and she and Chet alone would be the ones to go. That way they didn't feel threatened by any armed presence of Shortus or any of the others. Shortly after arriving, the talks began, and then by nightfall, just like that, the Red Cove settlement was now our ally. Oddly enough, they were more than happy to ally with us, as the Marshal Service had been slaughtering so many of their settlers. Now, this next portion of the video is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be a bit of a shift in the mood. We are going to be building up our empire more and more, and preparing for more battles and whatnot, but I did ask you guys last episode to provide plenty of names for all of our animals, so this is a little bit of a montage of me giving those names to our animals. I didn't include any of the comments because there were just so many, and thank you guys so much for that, honestly. But here are some of the names that we gave to them. And I know, like I mentioned, this is a bit of a shift in the mood, but let's keep in mind that naming these animals the names that you have provided is not just for fun, right? Animals that actually have names from a narrative standpoint are going to be much more cooperative. So you say Husky 1 at a husky, and it probably has no idea what you're saying. But if you name that animal and you form a bond with that animal, then it's going to be much more cooperative, and that's going to be critical when we are in battles, when we are being raided. When Shortus unleashes this just massive group of Huskies into a group of the RimWorld Marshal Service officers, having them attack, it's going to be extremely critical that these dogs know their names and know these commands. So it does help from a narrative standpoint as well. Something else that's going to help us narrative-wise is this wonderful hospital that we are now going to complete. You know, when we skin our knees, or if we take a bullet to the old gut, it's going to be very good to have a place like this where we can rest. Or at the very least, it's going to be a good place for us to be extremely comfortable when we bleed out and die. Now, I bet you forgot that we had Chet making that mechanical arm for Tree. Now, I didn't forget because I never forget anything, not even a little thing. So what we're going to do is install that arm on Tree. Luckily for Tree, the surgery went off without a hitch, and for Shortus, though, the same couldn't be said. It unfortunately didn't work out so well for him, and he didn't get his nice artificial arm. Somehow, Blitz couldn't figure it out. Maybe it's the fact that we have Western times medicine, and it's kind of like putting a square peg in a round hole. Or a more accurate depiction is probably slicing up little sections of the shoulder to try and shove this ugly wooden arm in there, and just kind of hoping that it works out for the best. But damn it, are you ready to be sad again? Because I saw old man Saburo out there crying at Lucky's grave. Yes, I know, it's extremely sad. I'm sorry. I'm doing the best that I can here. I'm trying to cry myself. No, but it was actually very sad. Her murder was horrible for all of us. Everyone was having a massive mood debuff because they lost their friend, their lover, their daughter, or their granddaughter. So something that we did to try and help with the massive mood debuff everyone was having is we actually began using all of our crops to make some fine meals instead of simple meals. Everyone would enjoy this much better, and they could all bond over a nice fine dinner. But then, as if just on cue, that old ugly snake reared his head again. Constable Morris brought in some more elite officers to have another siege against us. But we had had enough. This siege would be the last. Even if we had to die to stop the constable, we would pay that price. We began firing our mortars, and they began firing theirs back at us. Thankfully, they were a bit inaccurate with their mortars and shot a bit too low. We fired back at them, and we even managed to get lucky with one hit. Now, the majority of this hit most of the mountain around them, but we did manage to kill a few officers. Don't be mistaken, though they are all crammed into the mountain there for whatever reason, this is a massive siege force. Once they begin their raid upon us, we need to make sure that as little officers as possible are still alive. They did manage a lucky shot on us at one point. Saburo was completely fine, and Shortus was only slightly injured, though, thankfully. Then, just like that, after a few more cracks from our mortars, it began. The officers began making their way towards us to assault the colony. Surprisingly, Tree remained very confident with a smirk on her face, even as the trumpets from the RimWorld Marshal Service blew in the distance. Tree commanded that Oakley and Reek both run to the brewery now. It was very urgent and they needed to get inside. Everyone seemed to believe it was because the Marshal Service was coming to raid us. However, there was a different reason. Reek and Oakley sent a telegraph quickly to the Red Cove settlement, who were waiting in a camp nearby for the signal. Our allies have joined the fight. Constable Morris and the RimWorld Marshals had us outnumbered. They were not anticipating that we would join forces with any local settlers or even Thromboians. They thought that we all hated each other, just as we all hate them. But our hate for oppression and the evil Marshal Service has united us against a common enemy, and it is finally time that we take the fight to them. This battle will be over soon. Constable Morris and the other marshals will be dead. If not, they will be fleeing back to tell the others what had happened. But the Marshal Service will not be defeated here today. We have a lot of work to do. We and the Red Cove settlers did not let up our fire, even as the marshals tried to flee. They were flailing in the mud as bullets whizzed at them and over their heads to hit their comrades. We would kill as many as humanly possible today. But I hear you say, Rat Knight, what about Constable Morris? Where is Constable Morris? Well, there he is, don't you see him? Or what's left of him? It would appear that during the battle, Constable Morris was so surprised by our allies, he lost his head, if you will. Actually, Shortus shot him in the head with a cannon, which I'm sure felt amazing, seeing how Constable Morris done the same with his rifle to Shortus's daughter, Lucky. Well, vengeance had finally been served, and it was a bit of a closed chapter for us. Constable Morris had been the big bad, if you will, for quite a while now, and he had finally been defeated. But what do you do with trash like Constable Morris? Well, you burn it. We would not allow Constable Morris to be a martyr. He won't even be remembered. Chet ended up throwing a party just after the battle to celebrate the ending of this chapter and defeating of Constable Morris. In my opinion, it looked like everyone had a really good time. Everyone seemed very relieved that this was finally over. However, this wasn't exactly over with. We actually found a high-ranking officer bleeding out on the ground from the battle. The officer's name was Sergeant Sakura. She actually offered to give us some valuable information about an item cache nearby held by the RimWorld Marshal Service if we would only spare her life. Reluctantly, we did agree to this. Whatever chance that we had to disarm the RimWorld Marshal Service, or at least even partially disarm them, we had to take it. We did feel that the sergeant might not be telling us the whole truth, because though she states that she doesn't know what type of weapons are at the item cache, she also claimed that she's been there several times with Constable Morris. We felt that she might be withholding information from us. If this were to be the case, well, God help her soul, because we will not take that lightly. And anyone that we find at the item cache, we will beat them until we have answers if need be. The item cache, however, was not very far from Silverhorn Mountain. This is most likely where Constable Morris was getting the resources for all the ambushes and the raids. After arriving, we encountered the Marshal Service, but these were no officers. This was the RimWorld Marshal Service's military. These soldiers were not like the officers that we had encountered before. They were heavily armed, armored, and very well trained. Luckily though, Shortus had brought our wolf and our huskies along with us, and this would give us the upper hand in the battle. And just as well, thankfully, Hack had brought his trusty Molotovs and began setting some of the soldiers on fire. Unfortunately, we did end up losing one of our huskies during the battle, and just as well, the others were very injured. We accidentally ended up catching our wolf on fire, but he would survive. Shortus was plunging his sword through the chest of many of the soldiers as our huskies ripped the others to bits. And then the battle was over. But we had been lied to. This item cache contained no weapons. This item cache contained people. Many Thromboians, including children and one baby who were enslaved under the RimWorld Marshal Service. These disgusting, depraved degenerates have went too far. We formed up a caravan and started heading towards the Thromboian settlement to give back their people. Of course, after explaining to the Thromboians who it was that had kidnapped their people, and just as well the good favor that we earned by giving back their people who were turned into slaves, they of course offered to join our cause. The collective union between Silverhorn Mountain, the Red Cove settlement, and the Thromboians was much better than just between us and the Red Cove settlement. We may have a force big enough to take on the RimWorld Marshal Service. Unfortunately, before the caravan returned home, our wolf ended up succumbing to his wounds. An infection had taken over his body, and he ended up dying, unfortunately. We would honor him, however, with a spot in our graveyard. Shortus, obviously, was very shaken up by the entire ordeal, as he and Jaeger had become so close. They had really bonded within the time since he had tamed him. They were very close friends by this point. We allowed him the honor of burying Jaeger in the graveyard. Now that we know that there were people, slaves, in the item cache instead of weapons, there was talk of executing the sergeant. Hack was the only one that came to the sergeant's defense, saying that she claimed she didn't know what was there, but the consensus was that she was lying. Was she lying? We may never know. Tree came to escort the sergeant to the center of town where she would be executed for her crimes. Hack obviously did not agree with this, but unfortunately he was outvoted by the others. Hack felt that his opinion and his voice no longer mattered, even after his countless years of service and all the trouble that he's went through here. If this execution was carried out, Hack would have to do something. And unfortunately, it was indeed carried out. Hack was obviously astonished that they hadn't heeded his words at all. They basically threw him to the wind. But what would or could Hack do? These were his friends. This was his family. The only thing to do would be to leave. Hack gave up and decided to leave Silverhorn Brewing Company. He did not like what we were becoming. Hack believed that because of the death of Lucky, everyone just sort of went off the deep end. Rightfully so, of course, but when you become very emotional like that, there's a point that you come back to reality and realize that being emotional and making these types of decisions based on nothing but emotion is very dangerous. Maybe we'll see Hack again someday. Sometime later, we received contact from the RimWorld Marshal Service demanding silver. They state this was for our own protection, but really I believe it was to replace either the soldiers or the weapons that we had destroyed. Or maybe they were just being assholes and trying to threaten us. Regardless of the reason, after refusing, of course, we received notification that there was a massive raiding force from the RimWorld Marshal Service that had arrived. Leading these soldiers into battle against us was a very young-looking captain known as Hawthorne. He may be very young, but only time will tell how he does on the battlefield. We began firing our mortars at the soldiers, but this proved to be somewhat unfruitful. We sent Blitz over to the cannon to see if he could get a good view at them, and lucky enough, he could get a shot out. Lucky enough for us, a few of our cannonballs did manage to hit a few of their soldiers, killing some of them and injuring a few more. Unlucky enough, though, this enraged them and they began attacking. These soldiers were of course highly trained and very dangerous, but they were also very hard to hit as it was very dark out during this raid, and just as well their uniforms matched the environment very well. After a bit of battling, Blitz was downed very quickly and we began trying to make a strategic retreat back towards the brewery. Saburo was carrying Blitz back and then he was shot, dead. The others didn't even have time to see this as they were too busy trying to escape. They had no idea what had happened as they were fighting the soldiers. We had defeated the Marshal Service raiders though. The soldiers were extremely wounded, with the majority of them being dead or gravely wounded, bad enough that I highly doubt they'll make it back to their home base. Captain Hawthorne, however, would join them in retreating as he was too far away for us to stop. And I know this sounds cheesy because I did say this previously about Constable Morris, and it was obviously true, but this is not the last that we will see of Captain Hawthorne, mark my words. As Captain Hawthorne and his men were making their final escape out of our territory, everyone realized back home what had happened to Saburo. They were in shock. Yet another of our family member and or friends that had given their life in service to stopping this oppressive, tyrannical government that is the RimWorld Marshal Service. His sacrifice would not go in vain, though we hated to see him make it, and we're all very sad. After the gentle snowfall had ended, Bacchus had the great honor and great displeasure of having to bury her husband. And I hope it sinks in for you as it has for me that Saburo was the first person to truly join us here at the brewing company, and that he is now gone. Things have changed so much. As we look out into the fields of our beautiful city, we see nothing but dead bodies covered in stars and in green clothing with silver and iron helmets. And though these battles are these terrible, horrific events, each one brings us a step closer to liberating this planet. But for the majority of these battles, we have almost exclusively been on the defensive. Well, no longer. We are now going to be on the offensive. Before, we did not have the manpower. But now, we are not alone. We now have allies, and it is finally time. Tree managed to contact and get an audience with the president of the Red Cove settlement, as well as the chieftain of the Thromboians in the area. The three of them began planning out an attack on the local RimWorld Marshal Service outpost nearby the Thromboian settlement. However, it is worth mentioning there was a bit of a complication with this. Over the last few years of fighting with one another, as well as the RimWorld Marshal Service, as well as diseases and blights and crops and starvation, things like that, all three of the factions have dwindling populations. The amount of men and women who can fight are much lower than anticipated. From the Silverhorn Brewing Company, even Tree herself would be the only one who would be able to attend this battle, as the others had plenty of work to do back home with keeping the business alive, keeping the children alive, and just basically being able to keep everyone fed and everything running. But the three leaders did come to a consensus that the battle still needed to happen. Besides, we fought the RimWorld Marshal Service before, and we fought their soldiers. Yes, they're tough and fairly well armored, but we know exactly what they have. We can take them. But you see the problem, we didn't actually know what they had. They were all wearing this strange armor made out of this strange metal. You see, the RimWorld Marshal Service has many mines, many of them in the northern snowy mountains. And in the northern snowy mountains, they occasionally find this metal called plasteel. It is apparently a very, very tough metal, and these soldiers were wearing it across their bodies, on their heads, and across their chests, infused into their armor to protect against our bullets, and we had no idea at the time. All except for their commander, of course, who donned a ceremonial golden outfit. Nonetheless, though, we would prepare to try and kill all of them. Among our ranks, we had many settlers armed with several different types of weapons, and just as well, we also had a Thromboian death squad at our disposal. We once feared these men and women in combat, but now we march together as brothers and sisters in arms. A few of our settlers began firing their mortars at the soldiers. I don't believe we hit any of the soldiers right off the bat, but we did end up damaging some of their structures, and this enraged them, so they began attacking us. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think we were ready for what these soldiers had in store for us. I don't think any of us were expecting them to be as tough as they were. They began charging at us, and then our Thromboians began charging at them. The idea was that our settlers would provide cover fire from the rear, as their firearms were much more superior than the Thromboians' bow and arrows, spears, and things like that. The battle started off fairly well, with our Thromboians killing several of the Marshal Service soldiers. Tree was hiding beside the mountain under cover, firing with her revolvers, but unfortunately the soldiers managed to kill the Thromboian chief, and not long after that, the president of the Red Cove settlement also went down. Tree quickly came to the president's aid, throwing dynamite at the soldiers as fast as she could, but she too was gravely injured and was downed. One of the artillery people saw this and began running to her. The president instructed the artillery person to take Tree and run. It was too late for him and the others that were there. But Tree still might be able to recover from her wounds. The artillery person took her and ran far, far away until leaving the area finally. They both began making their way to the local Thromboian village to try and rest. Unfortunately, after arriving at the Thromboian settlement, we quickly learned that they had no reinforcements to provide us with. We could rest here until we were able to leave, but no help was coming in terms of soldiers. Since we wouldn't be able to get any reinforcements to help us, we decided the only rational decision was to head back toward Silverhorn Brewing Company. Unfortunately, just as many times before in this battle, the RimWorld Marshal Service had bested us yet again. And then finally, after a lot of traveling, sometime later, we made it back home. Tree was greeted by the sight of her young child. And this, my friends, is how we will conclude our Alcohol Empire series. I know some of you might be a little upset that we're ending it so soon. I'm having a lot of fun with the series, and that's a big reason I tried to make this episode quite a bit longer. Really, our episodes for this series are about 15 minutes long or so, and I'm thinking this one's going to be a little closer to about 35 minutes, somewhere around there, so I hope that kind of makes up for it, because we've crammed a lot into this episode in terms of the narrative and the story. And a lot of you are probably asking, well, if you love playing this series so much and stuff like that, why are you ending it? I'm sorry. I like it, but I am kind of ready to move on to the next series and the next chapter in the story. I want to advance the technology a little bit, advance the story, obviously, quite a bit. So, to me, it's not really about, I don't want to play this series anymore. It's, I want to continue playing this story in a advancing way, if that makes sense. And something else, I've mentioned this quite a few times, but something I like to do, and I've done it a lot in this episode, and I know it's always better to leave these things kind of subtle, but I don't know, I like to talk about them. Something we like to do is I like to kind of get y'all's, everyone's opinions on, what they think about the story and the decisions being made by the characters and things like that. And, I like to leave things up for interpretation. So throughout this episode, you've probably noticed, such as Hack leaving and Lucky's death causing an emotional, kind of breakdown for everyone, causing them to make more rash decisions and things like that. So I like to kind of, I'm throwing that out there right now. I like to get everyone's opinions, and I like for you guys to ponder, were these decisions made? Were these inevitable decisions that were going to be made by our characters, given the environment that they're in and what's going on politically in this world, the RimWorld? Were these decisions obviously harshly influenced by other characters' deaths and these other events that are happening? Obviously, there's some type of influence, but would this have been inevitable at some point for Tree and our other characters to become who they are now? And of course, I feel that it's obvious, but I'm going to say it anyhow. We are not giving up on the shared universe or anything like that. I'm sure 99.9% of you understand that and know that, but I just want to throw that out there for anyone who may just be watching this episode and haven't watched any of the previous ones, of course. We are still continuing the shared universe. The next series that is going to be coming out is going to be the Mining Empire series, and it is going to continue this story that we started in Logging Empire and our shared universe. I also maybe have a few possible spin-off series and or videos planned with some, I don't want to spoil it, with some interesting things that I thought might be relevant to add to our shared universe, so keep an eye out for that as well, and hopefully we have the Mining Empire series coming out pretty soon. But, guys, I just honestly want to, thank you guys. I can't stress enough how grateful I am to you guys for your support through the series, the channel, everything. When we started doing this, I started with the Logging Empire. I did not expect to be doing this over a month later, right? I thought the Logging Empire, I've said this before, I thought Logging Empire was just going to be this fun, goofy little two-part mini-series thing that I would do. It would give my under 2,000 subscribers something to watch during Christmas when I really hadn't planned on making any videos and I was just going to chill out with family. And now, we are over 8,000 strong, which is amazing. I'm so grateful for that. And I'm also just so grateful that, to be growing like we are and to have such an amazing community. You guys are absolutely amazing. I honestly cannot stress enough how grateful I am and just how much I love and appreciate you guys. And I'd also like to take a moment to apologize, because I know throughout this episode we haven't had a lot of room for humor, so it's mostly been extremely dramatic, so I apologize for that. I'm going to try, of course, to continue with humor in the future with all of our videos. But once again, folks, thank you for watching. Thank you for everything, your support and everything. I love you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.